It'll work.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. I don't...
It's working.
It's working. All right. Thank you very much, President of KBS, and also to Legarda and the Senator from Philippines. I think the question Nick asked, actually, from Your Excellency, was that what are we as small vulnerable nations, what are we going to do together in order to do something about it? My feeling in this is that we have to get together pretty early before COP and try to work out some strategies as to how to influence the maximum in this conference.
What do you mean by pretty early?
Early, at least by late August and September, latest by September. We are working on that, and we have been, I have had the privilege of discussing these issues with Dr. Pachauri as well, and we are going to work out something. And we'll try to see if we can work out some kind of conference or meeting in. But the migration issue is not something that's very close to our heart, because it involves so many feelings, it's so much, it's our land, it's our country, that's where we have lived for so many years. At least 3,000 years we have lived in Maldives. So migration from there, we have got 5 different dialects in the country, and all these we lose if we migrate. So this would be a last resort. But because of this reason, our President has actually started a sovereign fund to for adaptation and to take various measures. And I think the idea should be for us to work together and find ways and means of really trying to, because in the end, I believe that if this radical climate change is going to take place as predicted by many, this is going to cause a lot of problems all over the world, and it will not be only the small islands. It will be desertification, as mentioned by mentioned here, and there will be so many extreme weather patterns which will be very damaging, more damaging probably than even the sea level rise, because sea level rise does not happen just in one day. It rises, and it's not like a tsunami. So I think there are very important issues that we need to discuss as small, vulnerable island nations and small countries, vulnerable countries. Thank you.
But before you sit down, do you see commonalities? Do you see common themes here,
yes,
which are easily created into a significant multinational dynamic?
I think what we could do is, if we can work out a strategy on how to go about it, and there are, for example, for small island nations, there is the soil becomes, the water becomes saline, and the waves start getting on land. So we can actually create safer islands, which a program of which we have already started. So there are lessons to be learned from our experiences, from the experience of other countries, and then we identify these common areas where we can work together, and I think that would be beneficial.
Good. As many voices as possible, please. We have about 35 minutes left. I'll come to you in a moment, over there and here. Could you have the microphone over there, please? Please.
Marcello Palazzi, Tauber Foundation in Sweden and Progress in the Netherlands. A double question. One is, we really need to engage the business community, we need to engage civil society, and the double question for me is more about how do we solve the problem. One is there are networks like Global Compact that Mr. Kofi Annan was instrumental in starting, the World Business Council, World Economic Forum, new entrepreneurs working in clean tech and so forth. How do we engage them in finding answers to this question? Secondly, and connected to this, there is a revolution going on in social enterprise, in civil society engagement, and in Barbara's talked about grassroots initiatives. How can our governments become much more enabling in terms of allowing the energies of society and entrepreneurs to meet the challenges we face? And then very specifically, for you, the panel here, how are you engaging the private sector and corporations and civil society in your countries to create the resilience we need to tackle the challenge?
Senator Legarda, picking up on particularly on the private sector.
Thank you. Since I represent government, what we have done in Parliament was first to enact the important laws that the private sector would benefit from, and that's the Renewable Energy Act, to be able to access alternative sources of energy, which abounds in the Philippines, hydro and solar, and to provide investments for private investments, initiatives and for private investments and incentives for them so that there would be more investments and we veer away then from fossil fuel and from coal, from which we have been dependent on. There's also the Biofuels Act, and also recently the Climate Change Act was enacted into law, which would create the Climate Change Commission that would mainstream climate change in every department of the government. To be able also to create a disaster risk reduction law so that DRR and CCA are integrated is also very urgent, and that we have done in the Philippines as well. There's actually great awareness now in the Philippines in the private sector. Green energy, green jobs is being promoted, but of course there's always potential and room for improvement, but it's being done. So we in the Senate have done our part. It is a challenge now to be able to operationalize and effectively and implement on the grassroots the laws, well-crafted laws that we have done. That's a great challenge.
What do you think needs to be done next then, if you've made a start? What's the next stage?
For me, if you were to ask me, I would be a purist. I would ban any form of logging. 800,000 hectares left. Philippine forests out of 30 million hectares. 800,000, less than 2%. If you were to ask me, it would never pass in Congress because of a strong lobby of the loggers. I would ban any form of logging in my country, which has caused landslides, which has caused hundreds of thousands of lives and families and livelihoods to be lost because of storms. Villages have actually been literally eaten up by mountains because of the lack of trees. Deforestation is a big problem. What can be done? That can be done. Second, solid waste management law. It may seem so simple. It is an 8-year-old law. I'm sure other countries represented here have this law. But to be able to segregate garbage at waste so that plastics are not encouraged and plastics are actually segregated. These are basic everyday things that must be implemented so that people in the barangays, in the smallest political unit, must be able to feel their participation in trying to save the country, save our planet.
President Tong, the issue of the private sector here.
Well, for us, we have a very small private sector to speak of. But I think what's important is in terms of immediate measures, because we're still talking about the long-term impacts. But I think in terms of what the private sector can do, even in the longer term. I was in Japan quite recently, and they were talking and they showed me models of floating islands. And they cost about $2 billion, okay? And they're supposed to be able to last for 1,000 years. So my colleague from Maldives, maybe we should talk about this. But I think these are serious propositions. They're very much space-age technology, but we're assured, and these are private sector initiatives from certain parts of the international community. I think where the international community could interact with the private sector is the financing component. We would accept one of those islands for $2 billion, but can you find us the $2 billion? These are the questions.
Maybe you'll get a discount.
But maybe. But also the question of building up islands. That is an expensive exercise. And the last thing we want to do is leave the islands where we were born and where we wish to die. But given the option,
John Kufuor.
what are those options?